For this episode of the Carlyle podcast, I'm joined by freelance football journalist Richard Buxton. Richard has worked for a who's who of international media outlets from the FA, Goal, ESPN, and La Gazetta Dello Sport, which I think is particularly cool, given that I'm currently reading a book called The Miracle of Castel di Sangro, which covers the significance of the paper in Italy. So I thought that was really cool. Now, Richard recently published his first book, Fine Margins, which explores the rivalry between Manchester City and Liverpool, which of course has become definitive for the Premier League title over the last few seasons. The cover features a wonderful image of one of my favourite defenders, John Stones, pulling out that goal line clearance. I'm sure we need little reminding of. So, Rich, I'm really glad we've got round to having this conversation and that we're not freezing outside the park end for a change. I appreciate you taking the time. And before we get on to your career and the book itself, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about, what has your take been on football since the restart and, of course, 2021, now that's up and running?
It's been strange, I can't lie, Max. It's been surreal, especially since we've, the behind closed doors games have been in effect. And I mean, I think it's definitely noticeable at Goodison of all places that, as we all gathered at the park end after the game to sort of vent our feelings for the general team. You can't even get near the park end at the moment. You can't even get in the ground as a reporter until about an hour before kickoff. So whereas I'd normally be around Goodison, 4 or 5 hours beforehand, going into St. Luke's, going and catching up with some of the lads in the fan zone and stuff like that. You can't even do that. It's literally like, it's so sanitised. You've got to go in, temperature check, face mask, fill out a questionnaire if you haven't done already, go to the press box where you sit in a socially distant seat. And, it's strange when you see people you've known for 10 years and you can't really stand and talk together. I think I've had probably 2 conversations in about 15 matches I've been to, because everyone's just sort of in their own little, not so much bubble, but their own sort of in their own little world, because you've got less time to do stuff. You don't have the press conferences in person anymore. So, there's a lot of us running back to our cars in Stanley Park to try and get the laptops fired up and watch a Zoom meeting when I'm watching the other managers speak. So stuff like that is strange. But also I think the games as well are very, very strange. I think, there's not really any rhyme or reason to them, which I think is a good thing personally. I mean, I wrote a piece this week saying as much about, VAR, okay, it's contentious, but referees haven't got the cop or the strep for them screaming at them and, swaying them one way or another. So you're getting probably a fair balance on that. Teams aren't playing with fear, which I know is a factor for certain clubs, especially Everton. You look at the way, I think probably when you've got the crowd on your back at Everton, if you're an Everton player, that's as bad as having, a full stadium somewhere else on your back. So I think having that freedom helps. Not everybody plays like that. I think some clubs have struggled a little bit with it, but I think the fact that there is no rhyme or reason to these results, it seems to be a bit of a free throw. It's good, but at the same time, what you're getting in terms of entertainment and unpredictability, you're losing without the fans. I mean, Goodison is so strange now with Z cars ringing out and no one, roaring it on. Every goal that hits the net, you're not hearing the God of the street, basically greeting with elation. It's the same at other grounds. It's strange not having fans in, and that's the biggest trade-off with this. So for all the excitement you're getting, all the unpredictability, you're losing so much without the fans, and that is ultimately what is missing from this. It doesn't feel like football. It feels more like a test tube environment, I think.
Yeah, I could understand that. And from what I'd be, obviously, with you covering games, what I'd be interested to hear about is that, obviously, you've sort of likened it to a test tube environment, and I've heard people refer to it as like it's almost like watching training games at times. So from a player's perspective, what have been the most interesting takeaways from watching players? You've obviously mentioned that you see players playing, without fear. I was speaking to Andy Gray recently, who said, you've got, there's 2 sides to that coin. Some players, work well without the crowds on the back, whereas others sort of thrive with the sort of amped up atmosphere and the noise. So from a sort of technical perspective, when you're sort of watching these players perform, what's been your main observations?
I think the players are more happy to be vocal when there's no crowd there, which I thought would have been the opposite effect. I thought the players would be quiet there. I thought they'd be a bit more subdued. I thought they'd be passing instructions between each other rather than screaming them across the pitch. And one of the biggest things has been Jordan Pickford. I mean, how many times he berates Richarlison for not tracking back and stuff like that. And I mean, you watch games and you don't notice it then. Obviously, maybe because you got 40,000 people screaming along with him, but you don't actually notice how much cajoling players do. And you even look at stuff like this James Coleman, Kieran Gibbs incident with the Everton West Brom game, where he went off and said, "I'll do it again" to him about James Rodriguez, and Coleman's giving it back to him, and you think that's the sort of thing that you don't get to pick up on unless you've got a lip reader or someone's got a pitch that microphone, so you don't really pick up these things as much. So, but in terms of technical aspects, I think probably you see players. I think because it is so routine, it is so mundane. I think players sort of. I don't think they play up to it as much as they do when there's a crowd there. I mean, you look at, some teams, and we won't, we'll go into detail about who they are, but some teams do seem to thrive on, the crowd aspect of it, and do seem to play up to it a bit, even fuel it to a degree. And you're not getting that at the moment, especially with stuff like VAR being scrutinised. As I say, not having 10,000, 12,000 people screaming in your face is helping the referees. You'll still get the ones who are characters, should we say, like Mike Dean and people like that, but you're also getting a bit of balance because there isn't this pressure that if you give us against one team on the home ground, there's going to be rapture. I mean, I've been at games where that's happened. I think the one that sticks out for me was the Liverpool-Tottenham game in 2018, and I think John Moss basically bottled it over giving a penalty, which was interesting because I got about a couple of minutes later, he ended up giving one for the similar foul, similar breach. It was an offside ruling, and he gave it, and Anfield just turned nasty. And you do wonder when he'd done that. I mean, I think referees would look at that now and think, "Oh, I don't fancy that." I mean, it got really, really horrible. I mean, I remember I had to go and speak to Merseyside Police after the game because there were Liverpool fans around me screaming anti-Semitic abuse because of the penalty being given against them. So, referees do feel the pressure, especially, and we touched upon it in March. Chris Kavanagh sending off Ancelotti and disallowing a late Everton goal against United. You know how much pressure is applied to him being from the Manchester area. So I think stuff like that isn't as magnified when there isn't support in the ground. I think stuff like that, kind of falls on a secondary tier, whereas, referees can sort of look at things objectively as opposed to, thinking, well, if I get this one wrong, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to end up, having stuff sent around to my house, to my parents' house? And, that's the thing. I think not having supporters involved does sort of reduce that sort of aspect of it. So from the officiating point of view more than the technical aspect, I think you're seeing more of a, I wouldn't say a fairer game. I think some teams probably are handicapped because they don't have that sort of partisan support that sort of gives them that extra 10%. But at the same time, it's probably the closest thing to a level playing field we've had for a long time. And, probably going to throw up the most unpredictable season since Leicester won it in 2016, which for me is a good thing because this whole top four, top six order, and the usual suspects being in the relegation dogfight, it gets a bit boring, especially if you're covering the Premier League week on week. I don't like having to write, Man United have done this, or City have done that, or Liverpool have done the other, ad infinitum. Whereas I think if it was in the usual surroundings, with fans in there and everything being back to normal, I think you'd probably have a lot more of that sort of tired narrative. So it's good in that respect, but obviously, as I say, the trade-off is, we're losing things that we hold dear, which is having fans there.
Yeah, definitely, and the top six narrative is something definitely that we'll touch on when discussing your book. But before getting to the book, as you know, I'm really eager to hear about different career routes within football and in particular football media. And I feel like, just obviously from my own sort of subjective observation, that you are, in fairness, one of the good guys in journalism. How did things get started for you? And are there any sort of significant milestones along the way which you really thought, right, I'm on path and I know where I'm going here?
Well, I mean, I like to think I try and be a good guy and try and help people out where they can and, offer advice and stuff like that because, people have been in my position. Well, I've been in their position before, so obviously I don't like seeing people being, left to struggle. But my sort of path started in a weird sort of way. I started, I'm probably one of the few journalists whose career started out on MySpace. I was in between jobs and sort of just writing just for the sake of it, really, just throwing stuff out there. And there's a guy called Andy Teasdale who was he's written for quite a few magazines. He's originally from up north, and he just sent me a message one day and said, "I don't know if you've thought about this as a career, but you've got something there. Stick at it. You know, you never know where it might lead." Didn't really give it much thought at the time, and just kept going between jobs. And then I ended up doing a 12-month stint working in the NHS as sort of just basic admin work. But then I was getting to the point where I thought, I felt like it was getting a bit predictable, a bit tiresome, and thought, you know, I was 21 at the time, and I thought, you know, I don't really want to be doing this when I'm 30, you know, so I thought I might take the leap. So I basically took the risk of leaving the NHS, basically giving up a full-time job, you know, guaranteed wage, to summon it as a student to do me NCTJ. So I did that, and then that finished in summer 2009, and it was, I think a lot of things in journalism are down to luck, and I did get a slice of luck because someone did come to me and say, there's a news website called Click Liverpool, and they're after football reporters, and I think you'd be great for this, so give it a go. So he made the reference point. I got in touch with a guy called Chris Johnson, who's no longer with us, who was the editor of Mercury Press, but they also ran the Click Liverpool website at the time. And after a few weeks of just basically hammering out articles left, right, and centre, or, you know, basic news report, he brought me in and said, you know, we'll give you a few shifts at Mercury Press, sort of syndicate stuff to the national newspaper. I said, that's fine, but on grounds of morals and decency, you're not syndicating my work to the Sun newspaper. He said, fine, okay, right, we'll set up a distribution list for you that does include the Sun or the News of the World. I said, perfect. So I had a few bits to go in the Mirror, in the Daily Express, Daily Star, what else? A couple of things that went on sort of like women's magazines and stuff like that. It was just basically, you know, general sort of news hound stuff, and, you know, picking up interviews with people and ringing people up. And one of the first ones I had to do, which was a big splash, we had to get a comment off Everton for a story someone had brought to our attention about there was an advertisement for absinthe in the family enclosure at Goodison, and basically, you know, it was frowned upon because of obviously how powerful it was.
Right.
And I had to be the one who had to ring up Ian Ross and say, Ian, we need a comment on this. And basically got verbals about, I know you are, and I knew this was coming, this, that, and the other. And I said, well, have you removed it? Yeah, we've removed it. I said, well, can you explain why? Well, we don't have to, and then from the phone down. So that was a crash course in journalism, that, you know, you sometimes have to go along lines where you do piss people off who you have to work with. And I think a matter of weeks later, I was hiding in the press room at Goodison, making sure I didn't encounter Ian Ross, because obviously knew who I was and knew what I was doing there. So that was an interesting start to my career. And then from there, it kind of got a bit fuzzy, because even though I was doing stuff at Click Liverpool, I was on a freelance contract, and they didn't tell me for about 2 years. So basically, they made me work 2 years non-stop, and basically, you know, I earned what I earned, but the chance of freelance and sort of branch out was denied to me until I basically said to Chris Johnson that I'm not happy with this. You know, I'm getting nothing here, in terms of like making money and, you know, making stuff to live on. I'm going to call it a day. And he threw this thing about, you know, you do realise you're freelance, you can work for anyone else. And I was like, what? So, well, why didn't you tell me that 2 years ago? And it was similar to the Ian Ross thing, you know, well, I'm telling you now. And it was like, okay, right. So I was already 2 years behind the curve. So I started trying to get gigs with other people, while also doing the stuff for Murphy and for Click Liverpool. But obviously, when you kind of mind yourself into a hole where you just cover Merseyside football, there's sort of not many places you can go. But one good thing was that because of the Premier League accreditation system, and because Mercury was an agency, you can branch out to other clubs. So, you know, there was a chance to go and do stuff like when Wigan and Bolton were Premier League clubs, you could go to there. But obviously Manchester City were just coming up at the time as well. So, you know, that was just before they won the title. So for the 2 seasons before the season and a half before they won the title, I started doing Man City. 1 week and Liverpool the next, because we had a dedicated Everton reporter at the time. So, you know, I had to juggle the two. So that was my way of sort of diversifying my writing style, and also as well, when you get out of that bubble of covering one club religiously, you sort of see things objectively. You know, stuff that was going on at Liverpool, I'd see it at City, and it wouldn't be as profound. You know, it wouldn't be as as big a talking point, even though City had all this money and had this this crop of players that were coming up. So it was a good way of getting a good grounding in terms of seeing the other side of the coin. And they were great times covering City because obviously Sergio Aguero would come in, David Silva had been around for a season and a bit. And funny enough, actually one of the biggest moments that I remember from that time was I saw Aguero's debut against Swansea. He scored 2 goals, and the last one was just absolutely sublime. It was so good that I actually I wasn't driving then, so I had to try and bomb it back to Oxford Road Station to get the last train home to Liverpool. But it was worth nearly missing it for that because it was just one of those moments that sticks with you and you think, wow. So from there, I kept trying to build and build and build, but obviously I was sort of had a foot in both camps. I had a foot in the Liverpool camp and a foot in the City camp. Until midway through that sort of title winning season for City, the Everton reporter at Murphy Press left, and basically there was an opening there for me to cover Everton, fortnightly, weekly pressers, that sort of thing. And I mean, it's interesting the press dynamic on those sides with the two clubs because they're very different. I mean, Everton were at that time you were getting radio breakouts, you were getting paper breakouts, you were getting Sunday breakouts. With Liverpool, Everton was all in, so you weren't getting anything that you could hold back. Everton was out in the open the second it left the manager's mouth. So Everton was good in that respect, similar to City, because you did have those sorts of traditional barriers and those embargoes and stuff like that. So that helps in terms of obviously, understanding that not everything has to be fast paced. It has to be out in 5 seconds flat before some kid on Twitter puts it out. So that helped. And then obviously from there, you start developing. But I've kind of stayed loyal to Liverpool because they've changed hands ownership-wise a few times, but also there's been a chance to sort of, there's been a freedom to do what you want to do in terms of what games you want to cover and that sort of thing, and it's a steady flow of work. But obviously I've done stuff for other people. I did a bit for a company who were supplying content to MARCA and the Gazetta Dello Sport English portals. I think MARCA's is still going, but Gazetta's went a few years ago. And then I started doing stuff for like papers in the Middle East and the Far East and that sort of thing. So, and it's just basically just a case of picking up what you can where you can. Really, that's sort of how my career's panned out. It's been, stroke of fortune. I mean, I got lucky with one paper that a guy I knew was writing for them, and then he left. I think a month before I approached him. And I didn't know that at the time. He kind of kept that one quite quiet. So I was fortunate that I wasn't treading on his toes because I did say I don't want to be treading on his toes. And they went, well, don't worry, he's gone basically, so don't worry about it. And then, opportunities sort of come and go. There's not really, the freelance life's tricky because it's not constant work. You get regular work from some people, but you might not hear from others for months or even, a year or whatever. So, it's tough being freelance, and it's probably as tough when you've had a sort of 2-year hold on your career that you didn't even know about. So It's been interesting, but I think there's always a challenge with this sort of thing. I think you'd be prepared to have a full-time office job with a paper or with a magazine or whatever, or a website, as opposed to doing this, because it is quite stressful at times.
No, that's really interesting to hear, and I think I resonate with a lot of that, certainly when it comes to the sort of monotony of repetition and that sort of environment. That sort of, the freedom and creative expression is something that really I am looking to pursue. And in regards to what you said about the morality of papers, that's something that I really did want to talk about, because in terms of creative expression, I've always been considerably better at written communication and writing compared to verbal communication. But given the current climate, for example, given what the most read paper in the country is, I've pursued obviously podcasting a lot more. I feel like it's a more a more central medium, and one of those that you can get a balanced message out there. Obviously it's not sort of submitting to club clickbait or anything of that nature. And what interested me, obviously, it's a completely different environment now with the sort of death of papers, if you like. I was writing for a network And I don't know what it is. I think it might just be me sort of competitive nature, if you will. I did cover, obviously I'm predominantly, Everton based. I cover a lot to do with Everton, but I branch out a fair bit. I covered Arsenal, Chelsea, I wrote about MMA as well. But once I sort of got a bit of perspective on the company, and I saw, who else writes for the company and the amount of articles that they turn in order to earn a wage off the company, it just made me think again, maybe it's me competitive nature kicking in that I'm not really going to get anywhere here unless I sort of submit to clickbait and whatnot. That's not to say I'm completely abandoning Brighton, because I do enjoy it once I'm in the flow of it. And as I said, I feel like I'm better than that than anything else. I'd just be interested to hear your perspective on what's changed, sort of, with the digital revolution and the culture of journalism over the last 10 years. And how is it that you maintain your integrity?
I think basically to stick to your principles and, stick to what you believe. Don't write something for the sake of it, or don't write something because, it's popular to say. Sometimes, you need to sit your head above the parapet. So, and I've done that quite a few times. I've stuck, I've said how I feel about things and, what I agree with and disagree with, and I've used, evidence to back that up if I need to. I think the thing is, I learned quite early on that basically transfers and stuff like that are tricky things to have any sort of moral compass with, because if you're getting it from sources, and they could be, really solid sources, they might be occasionally be getting stuff, drift out through to sort of catch you out.
Mm-hmm.
Which has happened to me a couple of times. I think I had, a couple of sources, especially on sort of transfer stuff around the two Merseyside clubs. And I got sold short on two stories by two separate sources at different times. And every other story, that came from their tip off stood up, absolutely 100% credible, well sourced. The clubs didn't really want to put anything into sort of writing on it. They said, we don't comment on speculation, but basically, if you want to run it, we're not gonna go after you. Which is normally the sign of you've done something right. Whereas with these two, it was like, well, that's wrong, and we would be within your rights to sort of take it to the PGC, as it was at the time, the Press Complaints Commission. So, that was when it became a bit of a wake up that, even when people are well intentioned, someone is trying to stitch you up on the line or stitch them up. So, in terms of sticking to your sort of, I think this is why I just kind of stick to the factual stuff rather than, speculative stuff or stuff that, has a sort of 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. So, stuff like presses, stuff like games, stuff like, giving an objective view. So, I think that's probably the best way to sort of be. I think a lot of people try and make a name for themselves, and I think they see people like, these Twitter experts, these transfer experts. You look like Fabrizio Romano, who does stuff for the Guardian, very reputable. But then you got at the other end of the spectrum, you got that Nico Shearer, who's also Italian, but is complete cancer, complete charlatan. He's never had a byline in his life in a credible news organisation. But he's made a career, if you could call it that, off selling bullshit on Twitter. And obviously, if you've got that platform, you can sort of build it into something. But obviously, he hasn't. He's just running his mouth with stuff like that. And he's a bit of a joke in the industry. And there's others like him. And I've had conversations where there's been journalists who have been absolutely ripped apart by the colleagues in the press room. I won't name them, but obviously they're sort of, people will know who they are, and they've been ripped apart with an earshot of other journalists. And it's basically become like an open season, sort of like a split playground stuff. But people are entitled to feel that way when they see people just taking the piss and doing the bidding of others, essentially. So I think as long as you sort of stick to your values, and if that sort of thing, well, would you stand on the street with a sandwich board with that, what you put on Twitter or what you put in an article? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then don't do it. There's been stuff I've wanted to say on Twitter and in articles, but you can't say it. You can't, with the comeback in terms of the abuse you get, the potential legal threats you get from clubs and players and stuff. It's not worth it. So I'd say I think you've just got to find your sort of level in terms of what you feel comfortable writing about, the subjects, the sort of mediums, or in your case, podcasting. And I think you've just got to run with it. I think if you start trying to be something you're not, and you start trying to throw yourself out there as some sort of YouTuber or some sort of shock jock or whatever, and it's not in your nature, then it's going to come back and bite. And I think that's the difference between sort of 10 years ago and now. I think there's a sort of, I think someone said, I think there's a guy on Twitter who he refers to it as being edgy, but I don't think it's being edgy. I think it's basically selling out, and even ultimately to gamble that might not pay off as well, because if you're trying to do it to get in gigs in with outlets that aren't even going to give you a 5-second sniff, then you're basically just wasting your time. So I think that's the only thing the advice I'd give in terms of how you adjust as a change, because everything's like, it's breakneck now, isn't it? Twitter, you've got Twitter, you've got people doing Facebook broadcasts from games and stuff like that. You've got everything's got to be instant. Everything's got to be instant. But if you're not comfortable doing instant and basically breaking your neck to do it, which I personally am not happy with that sort of thing. And it's not really my sort of cup of tea. I'm more of a print medium person. So it's what I've grown up reading, what I've grown up looking through in newspapers, magazines. It's a sort of market I sort of feel comfortable writing for and pitching to, rather than doing broadcast or doing live broadcast and stuff like that. I mean, I did try before the Everton West Ham games to do a live TikTok, and it was so it was so unbecoming of me. It was just basically me walking around Goodson Road, waving my phone in the air and trying to think of imaginative things to say. Unfortunately, I think about 3 people tuned in, so it wasn't death by live streaming, but it was pretty bad. So I'm still learning, from the error of my ways on that sort of thing. But I think there is definitely a change in the landscape where everything's got to be out there, 5 seconds ago, if not earlier. And I think a lot of people sort of try and roll with that. But I think if it's not for you, I don't think go for it, because it's really not worth stressing yourself out and basically making an arse of yourself to the world, I think.
Solid advice there. Authenticity, yeah, it's a good shout. Now, you've told me that you've covered Champions League finals, you've covered football in different countries, which is something that I'm really hoping to do over the course of my life, and I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this and students, that's what they want to do as well. And if I'm not wrong, when I looked on your website the other day, I saw that you've interviewed Raheem Sterling ahead of an FA Cup final. Now, are there any particular interviews or experiences that stand out for you for the right reasons, or like the TikTok on Goodison Road for the wrong reasons?
I think I can speak quite positive about this. I think probably the one that I'd be remiss to mention if it would be the World Cup in 2018. That was it was probably the only time I'm probably going to get to the World Cup before 2030, because obviously the next one is in Qatar, which unless I can mortgage my house 3 times over, I'm not going to be able to get to that without making a loss. The one after that in 2026 in USA, Mexico. I mean, we don't know. Trump might be terminated by then, so he's probably not leaving the White House. And I don't really fancy going to that sort of neck of the woods if they're going the way I think they're going, which is a sort of turbocharged extreme of where the UK is going right now. So at the moment, that one's off the table. And then we're looking at 2030. I think it's Spain and Portugal are putting a joint bid in, which would be brilliant. But obviously, that's a good while away. It's 10 years away. So Russia was probably the best chance of getting a major international tournament. I mean, I know stuff like there's like the Nations League, there's like Champions League, there's Europa Leagues, the Euros, but the World Cup is the ultimate. And I did a sort of 2-week group stage excursion. So I sort of flew out on the day before the opening ceremony, did the opening game. I mean, to be honest, I went out on a bit of a wing and a prayer, because I didn't really know until the last probably week before I went whether I passed the games, because it was all sort of done ad hoc at that time. So, but miraculously, I think every game I applied for, I think I got a pass for. So I think I did something like 10 games in 14 days, or maybe a bit more, might have been 11 in 14. Involved a lot of travelling. I was based in Moscow, but I was practically on a red-eye flight to and from Sochi every couple of days. But that was a great experience, because there were some great matches there. I mean, I saw the Spain-Portugal game, the 3-3.
That was a game. That was some game.
That was incredible. That was. I mean, I was I was rolling in at like 5 o'clock in the morning to Moscow airport, getting a cab to my hotel, quick nap, change, and then straight off to Spartak Stadium to go and do Argentina Iceland, and then sort of it was kind of constant until about, I think, probably 1 or 2 days off in the whole 2 weeks, and then I decided that I'd come back because I thought, I'll be burning through money from just staying here. As great as the experience was, but it was wonderful. The fans were everywhere. It was sort of what you'd expect the football culture to be for a major tournament, and especially with, Russia sort of relaxed. It's disorder laws, so basically, where having a party in the street was frowned upon before the World Cup, and after it, of course. But there were people in the street having parties every night. You went out into Moscow, the centre of Moscow. There were people dancing. There were people having parties. There were people having gigs, and then so it was a great experience. But obviously, I couldn't be there for the entire tournament because I think I probably would have. I probably lost my own. It was that expensive out there. But I went back for the final, not thinking I'd be getting a pass. But when I got it, I sort of, got it on the Friday afternoon, and it was a mad panic trying to get flight booked to get to Moscow for the final on the Sunday. So I had the sort of 36-hour trip from Insanity to get to and from Moscow to go and do the final. And I think I was in Moscow for about 12 hours in the end. I think I got in about, it was something crazy like that. It was something like 12, 14 hours I was in Moscow. And the little I had was a bag on my shoulder, which had a change of tops, a can of deodorant, a razor, and my laptop, and that was it. That was literally all I went with, that and my bank card. So, that was done on the hop, but it was the sort of thing if I thought I might never do it again, and probably not for a good 10 years at least. So to get that one in at the age of 31, so to get a World Cup final at 31 is pretty major, and obviously seeing your article in print the next morning, and obviously because I was doing it for the Far East market. Well, it was about 11 o'clock in Russia, or 12 or midnight in Russia. It was going out in the Far East, so I was being able to read it in the middle of Moscow. That was a really nice feeling, knowing that I'd been and done that. Second to that, I'd probably say would be my first Champions League final in 2017. I mean, I'd done Europa League finals, I'd done Super Cups when we were in Monaco, which is in itself one to say, because obviously Monaco's not used for that anymore. So, going to that stadium, going to that part of the world, it's a treasure memory. But Champions League final, especially in Cardiff as well, was just incredible. Cardiff's a great city, and everything's centralised. So you can practically walk from one end of the city centre to the other. So, and that's basically everything incorporated. So, you're mingling amongst the Juventus fans, the Real Madrid fans. It was probably the first game that I've been under the roof for a Champions League final. And obviously the Mandzukic goal, which I think you'll know yourself, the overhead kick, which was equal. That is now, for me, to see that and to see the flight of the ball from where I was, because we were positioned opposite the tunnel, so you were seeing the flight of the ball and how he was moving his body to execute it. It was unbelievable, and it was just, Real Madrid came back and won 4-1 in the end, but obviously, it was one of those moments that you really had to be there to see it. It's one of those goals that you'd never, I'll never see anything like that again in my life. And, I've seen some great goals, but nothing that sort of take your breath away like that. And there was people around me sort of aghast as well, because it was incredible. And I think probably my top three, I'd probably go with first time I covered Barcelona as a journalist in January 2018. I went to the Nou Camp. And I'd tried a few times to get passes for Barcelona games, but obviously because demand is so heavy that you basically, it's up to chance whether you get in or not. And I'd flown over on the Friday. It was a bit of a strange time because my son had just been born a few weeks earlier, and my miss was like, "Well, why are you going over there now?" I was like, "Well, there's a chance I might get in for this one based on what people had told me." And I got the pass confirmed on the eve of the game, so I'd flown all the way to Barcelona from Liverpool. I basically picked up in the city, and I thought I might get it. And there's been times when I've gone there and not had a pass, and I've been waiting till the last minute to find out. Fair in the worst, obviously, but obviously I thought, I can make the best of it. But when I got this one, it was an incredible feeling to be able to go into the press desk, get me pass at like 10 in the morning. And it's a strange experience in Spain compared to England, because Whereas in England, you have like fresh facilities and food and all that. Spain's very much sort of relaxed. It's sort of, you know, if you can bring drinks into the ground, you can bring food into the ground, you can buy stuff in the ground. But in terms of fresh hospitality, there's nothing. So basically, I went to a bar nearby, and I had a drink and got a package up a sandwich and stuff like that, and packaged up a few drinks, get my bag, go through. Yeah, so obviously that's the sort of culture there. And what made it even better was it was against Alaves on a Sunday night, and it was weird because they had 50,000 in the ground, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like there's probably about 20,000. There was definitely 50,000 in there because of how big the stadium is, but because of the upper tiers and all that, you sort of see everything cascading down, so it looks a lot smaller than it is. And then it was strange because it was kind of on a knife edge till about, I think, the 84th minute, and then Leo Messi just stands up, kills a free kick in, job done. So what was really annoying though, it was just after Coutinho had left Liverpool, so I was writing about Coutinho, and Coutinho was the introduction, and then he goes and does that.
Yeah.
And I was kind of sat there thinking, I'm loving this, but I'm hating it at the same time because I was planning to do me on the whistle, drop it in, and then go down to the press room, do the presses, go to the mix up, try and grab a player. By the time I'd rewritten it and all that and files, I'd missed the presser. I think the only player in the mix was Jordi Alba, and he was finishing up. So I sort of lost the sort of full Nou Camp experience, but just to be there to see Messi score, and I mean, I love Barcelona. I mean, I think anyone who sees my Twitter, it's pretty obvious how much I love Barcelona. But to cover them as a journalist rather than a fan, you can go as a fan. Well, you could go as a fan. Obviously not anymore at the moment, but you could go as a fan pretty much, every couple of weeks, months, which I did quite a lot before lockdown, and I think I was there in February as well. So, I did it quite a lot, and I loved the match experience. But to do it as a journalist, I think that is the ultimate. To do it in the current setting, in the stadium that was hosted the '82 World Cup, hosted the 1999 Champions League final. It's seen so many great players. It's seen the Cruyff teams of old, it's sort of Guardiola teams of a decade ago. To go in there now in its current state, and it's probably similar to the Goodison experience. To be able to go into Goodison now, it will trump anything you see at Bramley-Moore Dock, because you've got that heritage, you've got the understanding of what it's like when it's absolutely rocking, and you feel part of it. And that's why for me that's got to be my top three, because it was such an incredible experience. In terms of covering a match, as stressful as it was. I mean, I've covered games everywhere. I've covered games Old Trafford, Wembley. I went to the Westfalen Stadion for Dortmund, which I'll get on to about the interviews in a bit. But that was a big letdown because it was a Champions League night in November 2 years ago. And it was a really poor game against Club Brugge. It was really not happening. It was like a game of chess basically. And you're expecting all these sorts of, you get told this vision of what the yellow wall's like. It's got these big massive displays and all that. It was nothing like that. It was just flags and scarves, which is just, it's great in itself. But when you see all these things on social media, the choreography of the yellow wall and how it brings everything up, and how the games are all so vibrant and that, end to end. And this was just like a real board draw, and it was very cold as well, to be fair. So I felt a little bit sort of shortchanged by that. But obviously, football isn't, there's no guarantees in football, is there? So you might go to a game and it might be absolutely dire. You might go to another game not expecting much and it might be absolutely brilliant. So you take the rough with the smooth. But I mean, Dortmund was a good experience because of the interviews I got. But I mean, I can come on to that in a bit if you want.
No, definitely. I've just those three stories alone, man. That's exactly what football's all about, isn't it? And they're things that I really, really, really want to tick off my bucket list before I'm 6 feet under. It just seems like a dream. And as you say, there's always that sort of element of unpredictability. Sometimes it'll go your way, sometimes it won't. And I think as low as the lows are, it is all part of the industry and what we're involved in, I guess. Now, you can touch on the Dortmund interviews here, but one of the things I also did want to ask about is that you talked about covering the Camp Nou several times, and I was very fortunate enough to have been there several times as a kid to watch Rijkaard's team and whatnot, made up, got to see like of Leo when he was coming through, Ronaldinho, Eto'o, all players like that. And yeah, you make an excellent point in that the culture is something just completely different. And then you look to Germany. I love German football as well. And I went to see when Everton played Wolfsburg over at Wolfsburg when they were in the Europa League, and that experience is just something that I'll never forget. So just how would you sum up the differences in culture across different countries covering football officially?
I think it varies from country to country, but I think there are similarities. I think in terms of like Spain and Germany, I think I feel quite comfortable, saying that I've had a good experience of. It feels more relaxed. This was something I noticed when I went to the Europa League in Hamburg 10 years ago. It was sort of my first introduction to sort of how different it is. And, you look at the cultures around it, you'd have the sort of the fan cultures, you'd have the tifos, you'd have the pyrotechnics. People can walk around the street swigging a bottle of beer and the police aren't, ready to sort of cuff you and bang you in the van.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of, there's a degree of trust with sort of German football. And, people weren't being, flanked for the ticket on the metro. You had to have had, bought one, validated one. And they trust you, they do spot checks and stuff. But there seems to be more trust in supporters in Germany as opposed to in the Premier League, I'd say, especially when you look at the way, fans, and we've seen it this week, are being treated like cash cows. And, you're just there for the product. You're not there to be part of it. You're there to be a marketing tool. Whereas in Germany, I think they understand, their league and their structure as a national football federation.
It's wonderful, isn't it? I love the way they handle their stuff, the federation, and how the governance of football in Germany is. I think it's second to none.
That's massive. And you look at the 50+1 rule. I did a bit of exploration on this because I did a few pieces for a few people on RB Leipzig when they were, funny enough, come up against Carlo Ancelotti's Bayern Munich for the Bundesliga title in 2017. And, I spoke to people at the club. I spoke to Ralph Hasenhüttl. I spoke to Peter Galaxy, who's the goalkeeper. But I also spoke to, people who cover the Bundesliga, either as, on the ground reporters or people like Kevin Hatchett, who's a commentator based in London. But their knowledge about it and about the 50+1 model is that, it was an education because you sort of see why people don't like Leipzig and why they're sort of, a bit of an upstart club. But at the same time, it's not necessarily a bad thing because they're sort of an outlier. It's not like other clubs are going to start following their leads. But even if you look at it, Bayern Munich are basically every sort of partner on Bayern Munich's brand is on the board. It's like a super brand. Adidas, T-Mobile. They've got Coca-Cola. They've got people like that. And then you look at like Schalke. They've got they've got people on there. There's loads and loads. Obviously, Bayer Leverkusen have got the background with the chemical factory, which is obviously a bit different. But then you look at like Hoffenheim. Dietmar Hopp's got his SAP brand has basically just become sort of funneling money into the club. So this 50+1 model is admirable, but it's obviously open to scrutiny. But in terms of culture, it doesn't trickle down to the culture. You don't feel like you have this sort of like a sort of, I don't know how to describe it, like a sort of off limits sort of feel like you have at the Premier League. I think the sort of Premier League has this sort of thing of this is our brand, and you can't touch it basically unless you're paying crazy money to be in the ground, or you're paying crazy money for cheap chocolate bars or for video games. You're not a part of this basically, and that's sort of in Germany. There's obviously the tiered pricing, and I think it's €15 a ticket. I think they were getting, and fans actually revolted when they were planning to hike that up, and then they revolted again when they were planning to put games on Monday nights for TV. So the fans are listened to, whereas here they're not. And in Spain, probably just as much. I'd say there's definitely a sort of an acknowledgement of how important the fans are. But again, I think they're probably a bit more aligned to the Premier League in that they see the tourism aspect, and obviously the tourism aspect can only last so long with Messi being there and Real Madrid having when they had Ronaldo, obviously they had to milk the cash cow as best they could. But those two leagues are still far and away from what the Premier League is. The Premier League is just basically it is basically an homage to greed, isn't it? And you saw that with the TV tickets, £15 a game for people in a struggling economy in a country that's going into recession. Many people are on furlough. A lot of people are going to be in local lockdown. It's criminal, and that's the problem. That's the problem with the Premier League. Its policies have always been wrong ever since the beginning. And even so, when you look at that, the Leicester this week about we want fans to come back to grounds, knowing that the government won't sanction it. They did that because basically they didn't want to have to bail out the AFL. So that was their reason for doing that. And then they're now, because they're not getting the revenues coming in as freely as they were pre-lockdown, for obvious reasons, people haven't got the money to buy merchandise, people haven't got them, the means to get to games because of these restrictions, they're now trying to sort of fumble around and trying to, raking the money whatever way they can. And as I said yesterday on Twitter, watch how quickly the clamour for fans to be allowed back goes quiet now. They can milk them from the living rooms. And that's the problem with the Premier League. It is just basically a money printing exercise for all of these clubs and these organisations that are attached to it. So in terms of obviously, we don't know what's going to happen post-pandemic, but I trust Spain and not France, Germany to continue sort of valuing sports is a lot more than the Premier League do. I think the Premier League have just got the completely wrong approach to fans, and it is that thing of fans not customers, not fans, and I think that's a massive, massive problem. And they've had how many opportunities to sort of solve these issues before we got gripped by a global pandemic, and yet they still went down this route of let's bleed them dry, let's make sure that they don't get the bare minimum, let's make sure they do not feel the product as much as people in Germany and Spain and even France and Italy. There is that complete detachment, and I think the Premier League, has to take the can entirely for that. And the sort of the whole culture is brought around it. And I think when you look at it, I don't know how you actually fix it. I think there is going to become a tipping point with this £50 a game viewing fee for streams. I think people are going to turn away from football, turn away probably from the clubs in terms of what they used to do. And I think that's coming now, and I think you're seeing it already. I think you saw a few people saying what they've seen on message boards about fans are going to turn away and they're not going to pay £15 to watch Burnley West Brom on a Saturday night. And eventually that's going to come home to roost, I think. And I think the Premier League should have been careful what they wish for in terms of putting this out there. But I don't think they actually care anymore. I think you look at the way that the whole Newcastle thing unravelled.
Yeah.
And and with this now, I don't think the Premier League care about who they piss off, because I think they'll just think, well, if we piss off someone Burnley, then someone from Jakarta will come over and come to one of their games against Man United. If someone in Liverpool is disenfranchised, by the way, they can't get into Anfield, I would say, all right, there'll be someone from Australia who'll come over. And unfortunately, that's the way it's gone. Whereas in Spain, there's a sort of balance of, well, we know the fans are important because the fans keep the game going while the tourists are taking pictures. Germany, it's even more so. It's sort of, the fans of the life. But here, I think they could take them or leave them. And that's quite depressing, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say so. And, given that I, submitted my undergrad dissertation on the significance of media coverage and broadcasting, and the lessening significance of match day revenue and the over reliance on broadcasting revenues, this certainly is an interesting time. And as you rightly outlined, especially in this country, there's certainly validity to your views, and that just the binary nature of broadcasting today and the business model that seems to be adopted by the Premier League. Now, one of the sort of criticisms that came back from my dissertation was it's not yet clear the impact that COVID-19 and the pandemic has had on the industry in relation to broadcasting and media. But I beg to differ, and I do think some of the points that you made really back that up, really.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been an impact, positive and negative, for the media industry. I think you look at, when there was no games on from March till mid-June, people were taking payment holidays, weren't they, on their, like with everything in society, people were taking mortgage holidays. But I think people started pausing the Sky and BT subscriptions because they just thought, well, what's the point in paying for it? I'll be honest with you, I had a subscription to La Liga TV on a sort of on-demand service, and I kept it running until about sort of project restart, and I just thought, what's the point? I'm not seeing any games. I'm only seeing reruns of stuff. And I think a lot of people were sort of of that opinion. How many times can you really watch, a rerun of a game from December on Sky Sports Football that you've already seen, that you saw it in the flesh if you went to games as a fan? You were basically paying out. It was basically dead money, wasn't it? But obviously now the sort of, the trade-off with that now is that, these £15 pay-per-view games, which is basically a resurrection of the old box office thing that came up at around about 20 years ago. I forget what it was called. Was it Premium Plus, was it?
I think so.
Yeah, Prem Plus, I think it was. And I saw them advert for it. One of the Everton accounts tweeted it earlier today, and it equated, I think it was about £40 a month, I think it was, And I think, it was £40 a game. It was something crazy. Like it basically worked out that for whatever the games you get, it was like £2 a game. Now you look at that and £15 a match, and you've got to pick and choose your games. Whereas you did have that luxury of everything being in a lump sum. So I do think that the pandemic's definitely bringing out the worst in football now, more so than than the detrimental impact it had on them. I mean, you look how many clubs tried to fill the staff. There was Liverpool, there was Tottenham, West Ham were one, weren't they? There was a few teams who tried to fill the staff using the government handout scheme, and when it was basically told them that actually this is bang out of order, you're taking a piss, they all reneged on it. But then this is going to be the sort of the clawback from that, because they'll now, because only Leicester actually voiced an opposition to this £15 a game pay-per-view fee. This is the sort of payback. The clubs who couldn't fill the staff or were shamed into not filling the staff are now going to get their own back this way. And I mean, I think it was interesting that only one team did voice opposition to it. But as I said on Twitter, the caveat is you don't know what sort of lies have been spun by the Premier League, by the broadcasters, to sort of sway the clubs into voting. Because it might have been a case of, this is the only way you're going to keep your revenue from the broadcasting. Don't worry about it, it'll be an affordable fee. Now, £15 in a recession, with people in local lockdown, like in Liverpool, like in most of Northern England, North East and North West, that's not attainable. And I do feel like a lot of clubs who would have spoken up, like Aston Villa, like Everton, teams like that, were basically sold a dud. And I do think, unless it's proven to be wrong, I think they were basically led down the garden path, because the broadcasters want to get their own back, the big clubs want to get their own back, they all want to get their slice of the pie. And how much spending was done in the window, it was ridiculous, wasn't it? And there was some managers pleading poverty. We can't do this, and then go and spend 50 odd million on 2 players in 2 days. It's ridiculous. Football is the biggest hypocrisy in the world, I think. And if we didn't love it so much, I think it'd drive a lot of people away from it, and you wouldn't entertain it. And I think some people will end up going that way. And I think it's because of basically it's become a sort of thing of checks and balances, this whole pandemic. The sort of the clubs and the media organisations who are the driving forces, your BTs, your Skies, the Premier League, their partners, the member clubs. I think they're all trying in this for what they can get out of it, because they know when sports are coming back, some are going to see a bit of a drop in football because people aren't going to stand for it. I think some people have become disillusioned. I mean, I know people who are season ticket holders at Liverpool, and they are so pissed off about the way they've been treated by the club that literally they missed out on the biggest moments in their history, modern history. They couldn't see their team lift the title. They were told, stay at home, this, that, and the other. They've followed all the social distancing things. They see people bouncing around in the streets, celebrating with no regard. They want to be part of the celebrations, but they were told they can't. And then the only thing the club can give them is a fucking shitty chocolate bar. I mean, that's the sort of bit where we're getting with people, where, getting to the point where they're thinking, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth paying £700 to basically be denied, something which was basically given before this pandemic kicked in. And I think a lot of people will turn away from it. I think, I don't think everyone's going to be in that extreme category. I think Liverpool's, it's a law unto itself as a club. But I think others will turn away. I think United fans will turn away. I think probably Newcastle fans, while my actually said will turn away because this is of what's happening now. I think some Everton fans might turn away because they're missing the feeling that the sort of detachment with the club, which is very much part of the community. It's a massive part of the community, and because of these restrictions, the usual practices of checking in with people, having the hubs open around Goodison, having the sense of community around match day. Some people might get lost from that because they're not knowing when it's going to come back, and they might just give up hope, sadly. And I feel like other clubs are probably, it's going to be a bit more sort of commercially driven and sort of financially dictated. I think people will turn away from that. So I think everyone's in it for themselves. I think it will bite a lot of clubs in the long term. But then again, as I say, for the big clubs like United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, they can just ferry in some tourists when it's safe to do so. And that's the thing. I think a lot of them would prefer that rather than having, people who've been going for 30 plus years, some cases half a century, they'd rather just push them off the door unless somebody's going to come in and spend £500 in the club shop on one weekend, compared to probably £500, on non-match stuff in an entire lifetime. So I think there's going to be a bit of a tipping point. I do think is coming, and I think a lot of people who, have been told that they matter and have been shown now that they don't really matter to these clubs and to the league and to the organisations who have got the broadcast rights. I think a lot of people are going to be sort of pushed away and become more armchair fans than they would have liked to have been probably a year ago.
Yeah, I know you're right in saying that, and for me, it is such a massive shame to see. And one of the great points that you made there, I can definitely resonate with it, is the fact that element of ritual has just been completely taken away from my weekends, and it's obviously had a massive knock-on effect to the week as a whole. Obviously, there was that period where there was no football and it was just reruns and rewatches, but now it absolutely kills me, especially given the fact we've made our best start in about 106 years, and we're sitting here watching it from the couch, and it stings. It stings an awful lot, and it's just bizarre to see the culture and the admiration that was so beloved from 60s, 70s, and 80s, early 90s. That's just been completely flipped on its head. The culture's turned towards commercialization and commodification, and that sort of ruthless business structure of turning fans into customers. It's strange, and that was one of the conclusions of one of my interviewees for my dissertation, is that there may become a time where there's obviously going to be, well, not obviously, it's uncertain, but that potential drop-off in viewership and interest, and the knock-on effect of that's going to have with broadcasters. Now, I think we've seen that in I think it was one of the biggest Chinese broadcasters cancelling a certain contract with the Premier League, and as I say, it's certainly going to be interesting to see how that pans out in the future. But now to move on to the book, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about, and obviously we've talked about, the sort of, I think it's just part of human nature, really, that people are very binary. Real Madrid and Barcelona, Dortmund and Bayern Munich, Milan, Juventus. Like, especially when it comes to football, it's down to its core, what it is really. It's tribalism. But in regards to fine margins, obviously the book that you've recently published, I've got a great deal of admiration for people who can publish books, because it requires a great deal of effort and dedication. Whereas we touched on it earlier when we were talking about the climate of today. There's people that can just condense it into a Twitter thread and buzz off getting a few thousand likes and retweets. And in regards to Manchester City versus Liverpool, just on a personal note, I think personally it's always going to have some sort of significance to me, because the day that I moved to Manchester away from home, it was the day Man City beat Liverpool at the Etihad 5-0 when Mane tried to boot Ederson's head into the Asda car park. But given United's stagnation since Alex Ferguson left, I think, what was it? The money came in from the City Football Group in 2008. Man City have no doubt emerged as Manchester's best footballing side, and obviously on Merseyside, bar a few commercial blunders down the years, director of football Michael Edwards and the vision of Jurgen Klopp over the last 5 years has just completely reignited Liverpool into becoming the best team in the country and the best team in Europe last season, definitely. I know you've delved into the archive for this one, so I'm really looking forward to this. How did the ball start rolling on this project?
Well, it started like a lot of things. It started late at night. It was actually November last year, 2019, when you might remember this, when the FA was trying to get ahead of the story that Raheem Sterling and Joe Gomez had come to blows in the England canteen 24 hours after the clash on the pitch at Anfield. And it was sort of a strange thing, because when I was seeing, obviously, the FA was trying to get ahead of the story, and then the papers were following it up, because obviously they've been told to hold back to 11, and about 5 to 11, the FA put the statements out. I put a tweet out sort of quite glibly, just saying, when someone actually looks back at this Liverpool Man City rivalry, there's one hell of a book in it. And then I had that moment's realisation of, like, why have I done that? I deleted it straight away because I just thought, I just thought it's going to be one of those sort of, it's one of those things that sort of, if you don't do it, someone else will do it. And I thought someone else will do it. And but I started researching. I reached out to 2 publishers. I think one was in Australia, funny enough, and then I found one in the UK, which was Pitch. And I just pitched. I just sent it over and said, I've got this idea for the book. Here's what it is. And he said, well, we like the concept of it. How far back does it go? And I'd had a few conversations with Gary James, who's quite a renowned Man City author and a Manchester football historian. He's really, knows his stuff. And he mentioned something during a couple of email exchanges I'd had with him about the subject, about, it goes back to the 60s. So I thought, well, okay, that's good. That gives me something to work with, because I knew there was stuff a bit further along from the 70s, 80s, 90s. So it came about from there, and then it was sort of, you need to have a sort of a word count. And I spoke to a guy who did, a guy called Colin Miller, who did the Frying Pan of Spain book, which was also published by Pitch. And he said aim for 100,000, 75 to 100,000 is sort of benchmark. So I thought, okay, fair enough. So I thought, I'll try and make it as definitive as I can. And obviously the tagline is, how they forge football's ultimate rivalry. And I've had some really, snotty comments, some really sort of, derisory comments, about how is it the ultimate rivalry, this, that, and the other, there's bigger rivalries. And I haven't said it, there's bigger rivalries than it, because there absolutely are. I mean, there's a book actually someone's doing at the moment about Arsenal and United fusing in the late 90s, early 2000s, which I think is coming out in about a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
So that's already in the pipe works. And then, Real was at Barca, as you say, Milan, Juventus, I mean, what I found really strange was, though, like, Liverpool and Manchester United is sort of, the most celebrated sort of rivalry in the Premier League and English football. But actually, if you actually delve in and look at the sort of, the needle in it, it's very minimal, actually. But that's why I call this the ultimate rivalry, because it's not about, how big the rivalry is. It's about what the rivalry encompasses. So it encompasses violence, subterfuge, competitiveness, poaching each other's players, or trying to in some cases. There's a lot of layers to this. It's not just a case of, it's the biggest one because Martin Tyler shouts about it on Sky Sports, or it's the biggest one because, everyone knows about it around the world, like they do with El Clasico. It's about what the layers of it, incorporate. There's been all sorts. It starts basically with City beating Liverpool to sign Dennis Law in 1960, and it's carried on. I mean, there's no question that it's got bigger over the years, and especially I'd say post 2012, it's got massive, especially when you look at the title races the teams have had. But there's always been something there, and there's always been players who cross the divide and players who don't cross the divide and nearly do, and there's all these sort of layers to it. So, I mean, that's how it came about. Writing it was quite tricky because obviously, you're in the middle of a pandemic, and people who had agreed to interview sort of drop off the radar. I mean, I won't name them outright, but there was a few who I thought were going to be absolutely brilliant contributors, and unfortunately, with everything that happened, they had their own things going on, and I completely respect that, and I didn't push the envelope with them because of that. But fortunately, I had enough from both sides of former players who spoke on record. I mean, I did approach the clubs directly and say, we're doing this, and City were quite honest. They said thanks but no thanks, and Liverpool sort of went me down a bit of a garden path, said we'll get you this, we'll get you that, we'll try and get you this, and all the interviews that we promised end up getting given to other people. I saw players who had asked for to do a quick phone call with, doing Zoom interviews with people, and I'm thinking, well, if you're gonna play it like that, fine, but don't lie to me. But fortunately, as I say, there was enough former players who came to the table. I mean, I reached out to a lot of them. I had a couple of colleagues pass on a few numbers, but most of them I got off my own steam. And one of them I was quite proud of was Glyn Pardoe, who recently died in May. I'd spoke to him about 3 or 4 weeks before he passed, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I was kind of really, delighted to get that one on record, because I don't know if that was the last interview he ever did, but if it was a bloody brilliant one. Drew was really good about the 60s, and so was Ian Callaghan. And obviously spoke to Joe Royle about, being a Man City player, being a Man City manager, and that sort of thing. But it was strange because of the way everything lined up, I only did one face-to-face interview. Out of all the 19 people who contributed, the only person I actually sat down with was Andy Morrison, who was the ex-City captain, who's now managing Connors Nomad, and I interviewed him on my way to Anfield to cover Liverpool Shrewsbury in the FA Cup. And I remember leaving thinking, I'll get loads of these. I'll be able to meet them face to face, be able to set it all up. It'll be really nice and straightforward. And then I ended up doing every other interview on the phone. So it was strange. But I've got to say, some of the contributors who have actually given the most had so little part to play in the actual rivalries. I mean, the ones that stick out for me are there's a guy called Jim Whitley. Obviously, him and his brother Jeff played for City in the late 90s. Jim Whitley never played against Liverpool in any sort of competitive surrounding, apart from a reserve game when he played against Michael Owen. But he was so insightful on what it was like playing alongside Steve McMahon when he left Liverpool for City, what it was like having King Coddy around the team, what the sort of culture was like when Joe Royle turned up, all that sort of thing, what it was like coming up against Michael Owen as he was about to burst onto the scene. And he was absolutely brilliant. And then on a similar note, Ian Bishop, obviously ex-Everton player, Scouser, I was supposed from America, and Ian played against Liverpool twice. But some of the stories he tells about those games alone are absolutely superb. I mean, he tells this a great one. I won't really give too much away, but he's an Arsenal fan, but he ended up going to Liverpool a lot as a kid, and because he'd been with his mates and his mates' brothers and that, when he played at Anfield for the first time with City in 1989, he said he just froze, and it's that sort of thing. It's like he goes through these different emotions about how he froze, and then he came up against Steve McMahon, who he used to clean the boots of at Everton, and all this stuff, and there's all these like little tales alongside it. So everyone who contributed was absolutely brilliant, and I've got to say the last contributor who was up in the timeline was Michael Ball, the ex-Everton defender, and he was absolutely brilliant because he gave a bit of an insight about what it was like being on the inside at City when Abu Dhabi took over, because obviously they had Watcher come in, promise them the earth, deliver them nothing, and he said, we just thought, here we go again, and he just said, as you saw these players getting linked and all that, you just saw what was happening. So there's so many people who've contributed to it, and I've got to say, some of the chapters might surprise some people, especially when you look at sort of, I mean, there's one about Georgie Kincloddy because, I mean, people forget Kincloddy nearly went to Liverpool. I mean, I know he says he would never have gone there, but Liverpool were definitely serious about trying to make a move for him when City had been relegated. So clearly there was an intention there, and going through the archives, there's so much stuff where Kincloddy says, I'd love to join Liverpool. I'll either join Liverpool or join Barcelona. There's always like an intimation, even though he never actually betrayed City fans. There was definitely an intention there from the quotes that he's given on numerous occasions saying that he wants to go to Liverpool. So that sort of feeds into it. And then obviously Nicholas Anelka. I mean, you could spend an entire podcast talking about Anelka. So there's an interesting story in there as well. There's quite a few bits about him, and that's probably I think the most complete chapter of the book, based on. I mean, I'm not saying that the book isn't quite a well-rounded piece, but in terms of like from start to finish, when you follow this player's journey, it's absolutely fascinating. When you see when he goes from PSG and to City by Liverpool, and he leaves City, and everything about it, everything that happened with him, it's absolutely remarkable. And we were lucky that Sylvain Distin spoke about him, because obviously Distin was in with him at PSG as a youngster, and then played again with him when he came back in 2001. And then he obviously went to Liverpool. Distin went to City via Newcastle, and you see all these you see what he's like, and it's so fascinating. And Elka, I mean, you can see why there's a documentary made on him, because he's such an incredible phenomenon as a person. He's so strange, so enigmatic, yet he was such a incredible player. And I did a bit of a breakdown of the impact he had on Liverpool when he was there, because he only scored like 5 goals in 20 odd games. But then you look at the impact he has on the players around him. Michael Owen, Emil Heskey, Gary Littmanen, the goal tallies were vastly improved when he was on the pitch in the second half of that season compared to before he turned up. So, everything in this book that sort of it all relates to Liverpool and City. There's not really a sort of, I mean, there's more City ex-players contributed because, let's say, we had more Liverpool lined up, but I think everyone sort of contributes something to this, and it's really fascinating how well-rounded it is. But I mean, the trade-off with that is I'm quite a perfectionist when it comes to proofing stuff. I mean, I won't send an article in if it isn't flawless. And if I see something that's repeated more than once, or I've used an adjective more than once, then I'll kind of go back and redo it. Because of the pandemic, because of games being put on hold, our deadline got pushed back to incorporate the game at the Etihad, which obviously meant we, one way or another, we'd know if Liverpool had played the game that would win the title, or in the case as it turned out, not play the game that won them the title.
Mm-hmm.
So all that stuff sort of pushed the deadline back. So whereas we would have had time to prove everything and go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, we had to basically, I think we finished it on the Thursday night after the City game, and by the Saturday morning, everything had to be signed off. So proofing the lot. The only thing that hadn't been signed off was the ebook, which we managed to catch a few more of the sort of typos and little bits here and there that sort of were edited out. So it's a lot more fluid in the ebook, I think, than the print book. But obviously, to get it over the line in the current circumstances, I think was probably quite remarkable. But as I say, we did leave ourselves short for time because of Project Restart, because it wasn't coming back until mid-June. I mean, if it come back probably 2 weeks earlier, I think we would have been all right. But because of that, everything got stretched to the limit. So, we had to make sure everything was as close to full as we could get. So, I mean, if there are people reading it and they do spot the errors, then I can only apologise for that.
100%. I can understand where you're coming from being a perfectionist. I genuinely don't feel like you've got any need to apologise after publishing your first book. I think it's a fantastic achievement, and going off what you told me there about the experience of collating the book together, it sounded absolutely fantastic. Just to get both perspectives here, I just wanted to ask a question on City and then ask a question on Liverpool and just get your responses in that regard. And you did mention it there when you were talking about Man City in around 2012. Obviously, there was that false dawn under Shinawatra and the Thai takeover. But when City won their first Premier League title in 2012, I really do feel like that birthed a new era within the Premier League, forming the top six rather than the top four. Having studied at the Etihad and worked the City Football Group summer camps last year, I've got to say I've got nothing but admiration for what's happened at Man City, its involvement in football. Like the renovation of East Manchester has just been, when you see what it was like before and what you see Soccer City afterwards, it's just completely unbelievable. But prior to the investment, as you mentioned there, we're talking about Classy and players like that in the 90s. City were no stranger to the second division, going up, going down as the song goes. Like, what were your main observations on Manchester City prior to the ownership of the City Football Group? And what do you think the biggest changes have been since?
I think the thing with City was, I think, you go back a bit further than the Shinawatra era, you go to the end of the Peter Swales era. I mean, that was quite a grim period. It reminded me a little bit of Peter Johnson at Everton, promising stuff, it not happening, and then, ended up with basically, in financial disarray, albeit Swales was over a 30-year period, whereas Johnson was only there for a good few years, less than a decade, I think it was. But I think City structurally, I think once Franny Lee's weird stargazing experiments ended, because obviously he had these flamboyant plans and they didn't come off. The club was basically taken over by two guys called John Wardle and I think it's David Macon. I think it is. They were, Man City fans, and they were actually involved in JD Sports in the foundation of it. So they were sort of big. They were sort of big retail magnates, and but they were very much City fans, and they negotiated the deal to move to what's now the Etihad. negotiated quite a really good deal. I think I get the exact amount. It was like $1 million a year, but I think it was a 200-year lease. I think it was at the time. Which to move City from Main Road, from the spiritual home in Moss Side, which was a great ground, but unfortunately had a limited scope in terms of what they could do with it.
Yeah,
I think that was a massive turning point, and obviously that paved the way for Shinawatra to sort of come in on a white horse and then ride out as quick as he came in. And then Abu Dhabi obviously saw the potential there, and differently to what Farhad Moshiri's got with Everton. They had everything in there. The infrastructure was practically there. All they really needed to do was obviously upgrade the training facility, because he was still at Cannington at that time. So to move from Cannington to Gazetta campus was a big step, and obviously it wasn't taken lightly. And they had more money to spend on players probably that they would have done if they'd had to build and relocate to a new purpose-built stadium somewhere away from Main Road, which is obviously similar to the Everton situation of Everton trying to build Bramley Moore Dock. You do wonder if Bramley Moore Dock was still in existence if Farhad Moshiri had come in 2016 with a new stadium already built and endless resources, whether that would have changed how the club's path went. But you just don't know. Unfortunately, these things are down to hindsight a lot of the time. So I think City though have been, and they've taken some Cameron into the Abu Dhabi group. Let's not forget they've been accused of all sorts. Some people are conflating them with human rights abuses. And that was the big thing about the UEFA ban that was thrown out of court over the summer. They've had to take some absolute crap that a lot of owners in this country have not had to face. I mean, I don't even think Abramovich has faced anywhere near this much. Scrutiny. Obviously, he's had his residency visa rejected, but nothing on the level that City have faced from, not just from the Premier League, from football fans, but from the actual media in this country. I mean, you look at the absolute jubilation from some hacks in February when City looked like they were going to be 2 years out of the Champions League, and it was absolutely disgusting. And it did both. I think it bordered on xenophobic and racial leaning. So I think City's owners, to come out of all this with their heads held high, to continue doing what they've done, to have brought in this success that they brought, I think all power to them, because they have had to deal with some absolute shit. And I think that's the only way I can categorise it.
yeah.
There's probably more polite terms, but that is the only way I can describe it. They've had to put up with some absolute dog's abuse. And if any club deserves to be riding high finally, I think it's second to Everton, it's Manchester City. They've had to go through some absolute ordeals. As you say, yo-yo spells in the Football League. They went down to Division 2. Let's not forget, came back up again, and then managed to consolidate themselves as a Premier League club for the best part of nearly 20 years now. So I think if anyone deserves the credit for finally coming out the other side, I think City deserve it, and I think all power to their owners personally.
Yeah, definitely. I would echo that. And in regards to Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, I think, as you say, all power to him and the business that he's managed to do. And you look at the global presence of the City Football Group right now, it's just absolutely sensational what they've managed to do over the last 10 or so years. Now, moving on finally to Liverpool. I guess, right, this is coming from my sort of childhood recollections. I always knew Liverpool were a big club. Yeah, I'd never dispute that they weren't a significant or big club. Obviously, being brought up on Everton's successes of the 60s and the 80s, I knew just how big Liverpool were in the 70s and how they rivaled Everton in the 80s. Now, when it came to me in my teenage years, when I was going through high school, that was around the time Benitez left. You had Hodgson and Dalglish come in for his second stint as manager. And in all honesty, Liverpool were a joke at times. Obviously, you've got the Hicks and Gillett sort of the ownership situation, which had them close to real danger. But, in terms of competitiveness, Everton were seriously always up against them. Obviously, yeah, we got the poor record on derby fixtures, but in regards to sort of league positioning, we were always their sort of neck and neck rivals. And given Moyes' last 2 seasons in charge of the club, Everton finished above them. And like you rightly said before, when we were talking about the sort of the brand value of Everton, it feels like at the time when Jurgen Klopp came into Liverpool, when he took his hiatus, when he left Dortmund, I was really dreading the worst that he would go to Liverpool, because obviously there are the similarities in a sense between Liverpool and Dortmund, given their sort of, I hesitate to say cultural following, but there's obviously that sort of, that sense of community and the sort of the under-realised value of the brand itself, the sleeping giant, if you will. So, given someone that's worked in the industry and covered them during that time, what have you made of the resurgence of Liverpool, and how have they managed to consolidate themselves into the force that we've seen today?
Well, I think they've had to spend big, haven't they? They've had to spend big to actually get players who are capable of, elevating them to that level. You look at Virgil van Dijk, 25 million, Alisson 65, Fabinho 43 million, Naby Keita 52 million. These weren't cheap signings. I mean, you're probably they brought in that Thiago Alcantara for whether they say it on the drip, it's 25 million. Diego Costa for 41 million. They've had to spend to upgrade the squad.
Yeah.
No question. I mean, the idea of Moneyball, which was Fenway Sports Group's mantra when he came in, and, it really didn't work. We had 20 million on Stuart Down and, 7 million on Charlie Adam. I mean, Jordan Henderson, to be fair to him, has actually paid off because of how compatible he is within various, tactical styles and formations.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone else apart from that list actually comes out as a genuine quantifiable success. And even, you look at the year after, Barini came in, they tried to sign Clint Dempsey, you've got Nuri Sahin on loan. They've gone for this real trial and error system. And it was only really, I mean, they struck lucky with Luis Suarez, let's be honest. They struck lucky because that was the same window they lost Torres, bought Andy Carroll. So, in terms of actual successes, Liverpool until about probably, I'd say, 2016 when they signed Mane and Wijnaldum, players like that, whether they did actually pay big money for them and then try and scrimp, which I think was a very harsh lesson for FSG to learn, to be honest, because, they thought they could just use the Billy Bean model of low value, high sale, that sort of model. And they thought that was going to work, and it doesn't work that way in English football. I mean, if it did, then Billy Bean wouldn't be supporting Arsenal. I mean, even Arsenal spent crazy money, even on wages, and signing Luis and signing Willian. Nicolas Pepe obviously came in. This idea that you can just spend very little and get maximum returns. It's not a uniform model, and I think that's why FSG had to learn the hard way. Even before Klopp came along, they were learning that the hard way, and I think that's been one of the things that they've taken away from this, and that's why they went big to Klopp rather than getting essentially a budget Pep Guardiola in Brendan Rodgers again. Getting another short-term fix who's promising the earth on a shoestring budget, which is essentially what Rodgers, when he started out, was trying to do. I mean, even look when he went for the title in 2013-14. You look, I don't think any players actually came in for more than 10 million. I think Iago Aspas was probably the most expensive signing. No, sorry, tell lie. Obviously, Saka was the marquee signing at 18 million, but him aside, I don't think they actually spent more than 10 million on any other player. I think Mamadou Saka was probably the most expensive signing in that window. So clearly, the Moneyball principle was still in effect then. And then the year after, obviously, it all fell apart. They started spending a bit more, signing the wrong players. But then they've obviously now got this structure of having a sporting director rather than the archetypal director of football that they had with Damien Comolli, who was just basically just buying anyone who he thought would be a good fit. I mean, there seems to be a strategy of, does this player fit what we want to do? And generally, they say, yeah. I mean, there have been exceptions. You look at in 2018, they just lost the Champions League final, and they tried to sign Nabil Fekir, who's now at Real Betis. He was at Lyon at the time, and his medical basically came back. According to the people at the club, came back that his knees were not all they were needed to be a Premier League footballer with pace. So they passed up that one. But I think probably, that's the sort of thing. He was probably a sort of player that, Xherdan Shaqiri benefited from, them losing out on him, and Shaqiri comes in because he sort of has that sort of profile of an impactful player with a bit of pace on him. So it's been a case of having to find players who suit the style the club wants to play, who's up to the task of the physical demands he puts on them. And I think that's been a big thing. I think we've had to really find a way because, there have been a few lucky strikes, especially even if you look at, the Hicks and Gillette era, Fernando Torres coming in, he obviously knew he was quality. But the players around him, I don't think anyone really was what you call first team quality for a club of Liverpool's stock at that time. They've just been to 2 Champions League finals in 3 years. I don't think Yoshi Benayoun or Ryan Babel were ever going to be cut out for that sort of level of a club of those aspirations. So I think, finding players that suit the profile rather than suit, a shoestring budget has been a big thing. And I think FSG, had to come through a lot of hurdles. And as you mentioned about the Everton, I think it was called the power shift, wasn't it? I think they called it when Everton finished above Liverpool twice in as many seasons. I think that probably could have. If Everton probably had got a manager with a bit more of a defensive mindset than Roberto Martinez, but had that same, attacking freedoms, I think Everton probably could have, made it 3 or 4, and maybe Everton would have finished above Liverpool for the 3rd season, and Liverpool wouldn't have even been in the title race. You just don't know. A lot of things came together for Liverpool, especially Suarez coming back from a 10-game ban for biting players.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was his second biting ban. I think it was 10 games for biting Ivanovic. And I think he came back with a quick reprieve, especially after the whole Arsenal debacle. So, that was a team that was more than the sum of his parts. When Gerrard was aging, Daniel Sturridge was just about getting run together, and Raheem Sterling was coming up. But, it was basically resting on Suarez's goals more than, solid defence. So I think they've had to learn the hard way, and I think that's probably, it's a long-winded way of saying basically, I think they've had to learn the hard way. I think that's the only way I can say it. And, they have learned the mistakes. They've not, they're still making mistakes, obviously. They fail over the staff. They tried to charge fans £77 a match ticket. They're making mistakes still. That's undeniable. But on the pitch, there seems to be an understanding between the technical team, which is Klopp, his assistants, and Mike Edwards, the sport director, and the FSG hierarchy, which is Mike Gordon, and then to a slightly lesser extent, because they're a bit more removed, Tom Werner and John Henry, are looking at it and thinking, right, well, we need to start understanding what they want rather than what we want. Because that Clint Dempsey signing that never was definitely felt like a marketing ploy by the owners. I don't doubt that Brendan Rodgers didn't want him, but I think FSG probably started realising it doesn't matter if a player, sell shirts. They'll sell shirts if you're league champions. They'll sell shirts to the European champions.
Yeah.
You just need to have a team that gets there. And unfortunately, I think they realised a bit too late, because I think if they'd realised sooner, they might have won that league title a few years sooner than they did. But obviously, they're still learning, and they're now 10 years into English football. They've had to learn the hard way, really, because I don't know many owners who have had the fans on the back and still live to tell the tale. You look at the Glazers. They're clinging on. Mike Ashley's clinging on. You even look like Arthur Kroenke, who's getting down the banks. Villa have had a few owners seen off. Even Daniel Levy, who's a homegrown administrator, him and Joe Lewis are getting pelters from Tottenham fans until this Gareth Bale signing came in, because I think they felt that the club was going in the wrong direction. So, you don't tend to come out of these things with your credibility intact if you make too many mistakes. And I think they managed to put the handbrake on that before it was too late, because otherwise I think if they carried on down the route of, showing a complete lack of nuance towards the fans and towards the club supporters, I think they would have ended up probably in the same position that Hicks and Gillette would have done. But I think they had the presence of mind to actually say, we don't want to be like them. We want to do it our way. We want to do it right. And I don't think their intentions have ever been anything other than honourable. So I think it was just a case of they had to get everything together. And I think it's now coming together, but you just don't know, do you? You just don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, no one saw them losing 7-2 against Villa. So, you don't know what the future's going to hold, but they seem to be going in the right direction at the moment.
Yeah, I would say so. You make some fantastic points there in regards to the ownership and the hierarchical structure of Liverpool, and how that's adhered to that of a winning organisation. And for me, I follow Dortmund relatively closely, and I have done ever since they beat Malaga, I think in the Champions League a good few years ago. I think it was in like 2012. That's when they really captured my imagination, and I really did fall in love with Klopp's side and his sort of philosophy of football. And I think what I was at a loss for words for before was the club culture that he creates. Ultimately, I feel like he just hits the nail on the head in the culture that he creates at a football club. Now, he's obviously enjoyed the most successful days of his career, managerial career, over these last few seasons. And at times, we've seen him sort of lift the mask of that sort of positive, uplifting coach, moaning. But aside from that, I still can't bring myself to say anything negative about the man. I think he's absolutely fantastic at what he does. And now we're obviously another dynamic to the City and Liverpool rivalry is the tactical head-to-heads and the clashes between Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp. To what extent do you feel like that influenced the book? And how long do you feel like this two-horse race will sustain itself?
Well, I mean, from an objective point of view, I hope the two-horse race sort of sustains itself for probably half a season, because, you know, we need to have more teams like Everton, like Leicester up there and battling it out. I do think the Klopp and Guardiola dynamic is definitely part of probably it was a driving force in the book, because I think that's sort of where it exposed into life. But obviously, you know, before that there was Roberto Mancini and Brendan Rodgers. There was, you know, Pellegrini and Brendan Rodgers. There was Roberto Mancini and Kenny Dalglish. You know, going back a bit further, you know, you look at Benitez and Kevin Keegan, and Joe Royal. You know, there's always been these sorts of, I even go back to like the sort of Joe Mercer, Bill Shankly era. There's always been these sorts of dynamics and different styles coming into play. But I do think the sort of, I mean, Klopp and Guardiola have really raised the bar. I mean, exponentially. You know, I mean, two teams getting, you know, 198 points over 2 seasons is incredible. You know, to do what City did, and then to do what Liverpool did, you know, in matching them. I think you've got to have some real sort of intensity to do that. And, you know, I think probably players of previous decades probably wouldn't have been able to sustain it. You know, obviously, you know, everyone's got to be up fitter. You've got to have you know, sharper technical attributes. You know, your pace has got to be absolutely spot on. You know, if you go out and have a few pints after the game on a Saturday, you're going to really pay for it in the week, compared to probably 30, 40 years ago, where, you know, you could have a drink and, you know, you could sort of not phone it in, but you could sort of ease off a little bit in training and in parts of games when there's a bit of a lull. Whereas now everything's completely breakneck speed, and, you know, I think the concern is going to be is if one of them pulls away again more than anything, because obviously City have had that drop off since 2018-19. You know, they fell massively away last season, losing games they shouldn't have lost. I mean, I know people will pick on the, you know, them losing to Leicester recently, but Leicester were on good form, and City obviously had, you know, injuries and COVID-related issues. So, you know, I don't think you can be too scrutinising of City for that. But obviously, there's, you know, there does feel like a bit of a drop off, and especially when Guardiola was saying about how if he's going to stay around at City and, you know, stick around beyond this season, he's got to earn a new contract. I just get a feeling that this might be, it feels a bit sort of 2012 Barcelona. It feels to him at the moment. You feel like there's not so much stuff has been knocked out for him, but you feel like he knows he's come up against a machine, similar to the Real Madrid team with Mourinho. Against a machine who are finally going to overcome him and overpower him, as he's done in the league. And it does feel like if he can't, you know, capture that magic again, I think he might walk. I mean, I'd love to hope he doesn't, because he seems quite settled in Manchester. But if he doesn't feel sense of self-worth that feels he merits another contract, that could be dangerous. But similarly, I mean, Liverpool could end up in that sort of phase they've done when they've gone close to titles and not won them. I mean, you look at historically, you know, Benitez's last season was, you know, after finishing second to United, and they completely fell away. Rodgers season after the last full season he was in Scars before Klopp came in, completely fell away. Houé completely fell away. Because they made the wrong signs, they made the wrong additions, and the team started to show its limitations. I don't think that's going to be happening with this Liverpool team, especially with the players they brought in. But by the same token, you don't know if these freak results that keep happening in the Premier League at the moment. Leeds getting 3 goals at Anfield, Liverpool. If games are going to be a little bit less predictable and less formality like, it might take it out of Liverpool. And we know that the physical exertions will take the toll eventually on any team, as we've seen with City playing at that, consistently high levels, sublime football for 2 seasons on the bounce.
Yeah.
I think it could happen with Liverpool. So the danger is if one or both of them fall away, you're letting the people sneak in. I think Chelsea have got a good shout if they can get their act together with the team that they've got now, with the the additions they've made. Everton obviously leading the table right now. You don't know how far that momentum is going to take them. So if Liverpool and City drop off, one of them or both, it's going to let people in through the back door. And unfortunately, I fear that it's going to happen to at least one of them. I'd love it to continue the way it's been going for the past few years, but I mean, it's that thing that Ferguson said, wasn't it, about every team has a 3 to 4 year cycle before you need to start burning the deck, shaking things up, to freshen it. Whereas, I mean, there seems to be incremental tweaks that Liverpool are making. City is sort of replacing, what they've lost in Sané and company. So, I mean, I feel like they're both prone to drop off. So I don't think they will both drop off, but I think one of them might drop off, and I think that's the cumulative effect of what they've been doing for the past few years. Because it's like with a heavyweight boxer, you can't keep doing 12 rounds every week for the rest of your life. And in football parlance, it's 2-3 times a week. You've got Champions League, you've got League Cup, FA Cup. If you go into the sort of the knockout stages of like the Champions League, that's even you're doing games 2-3 times a week. So essentially, you're having 3 knockout bouts of 12 rounds every week. I mean, that's going to knacker anyone. So I mean, I know it's obviously a bit of a crossover, but I mean that'll knacker anyone, and I think that's what we're seeing with these two teams. I think Liverpool had to pull away from City to sort of get this title over the line, but City I think City will feel the limitations. I think Liverpool might feel the limitations for all the signings they made. They might feel them. You just don't know who's going to blink first, I think, this season. And I think that's what's going to be the most telling. It's which team drops off. I mean, City have had a drop off, so Liverpool. You can't just say it after 3-4 games in the Premier League season, in a very weird season with behind closed doors settings, which altered the dynamic of matches and how they play out with refereeing decisions and home advantage. You don't know how it's going to manifest, but I think both teams probably are more vulnerable to having a drop off now because they've both been performing at that level than probably at any other time in the past few years.
Definitely, I think that's a well-informed prediction. Really, that's completely correct. I feel like nothing lasts forever, and in regards to the health of the competitive nature of the Premier League, you would like to think that that sort of the binary narrative does retire itself, and we see a birth of competition, as we've sort of outlined before. Certainly there's room for new teams to break into the upper echelons of the league. We mentioned from there, and Everton, how they're going at the minute. Wolves have played exceptionally well over the last couple of years, and of course Leicester, given how they've invested since winning the Premier League in 2016, are looking like a real threat at the moment. Now, Rich, I just want to say this certainly is up there with one of the favourite podcasts that I've done. I've loved listening to some of your stories and of course the research into the book. I know this most certainly won't be your last appearance on the podcast, and I just want to say for the people that are listening and people who are interested in getting their hands on the book, where can people get a hold of it?
Well, it's a bit tricky at the moment because no bookshop seems to be stocking it, because as soon as it goes in, it goes out, which can't be a bad thing. But it is available on Amazon. You just search for Fine Margins, and I think it's the first thing that comes up. So it's actually on a reduced price now. It's normally £12.99. I think it's about £10 if you don't Prime. So if you've got Prime, you can probably get it at knockdown price, and also you can get the ebook as well. So if you want to read it on your phone or on your Kindle or whatever, you can do that as well. So it's probably more accessible online than it is in the shops at the moment, which is quite surprising, to be honest.
Yeah, strange world we live in at the moment, mate. Rich, thanks very much for your time, mate. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
No worries, Max. Cheers for having me on.
Thanks, man.